Welcome to the Roberta Glass True Crime Report. Today I have a very special guest. Isabelle McFadden is here to talk about Madeleine McCann and what's up with the DNA. So welcome, Isabelle.
Hello, Roberta. How are you?
Very well. So I am really excited to talk to you about all the explosive revelations that have been happening with this case, mostly from the Maddie podcast, which is excellent if you haven't heard it. So my first question is about the McCann DNA. What are we talking about when we talk about the DNA in the McCann case, and who collected it and how was it tested?
Sure. Basically, the Portuguese forensic team on the site conducted testing that was to be at the instruction of the FFS, which was a now debunked laboratory in Birmingham, England. Many of the Portuguese forensic scientists have long wondered why Portugal allowed for all of our samples that could have very easily been tested, why they were sent to England. Many argue why weren't the items collected sent to maybe Switzerland or Germany or a more neutral party. They believed at the time that Portugal wanted to show goodwill, good faith. Well, maybe that was the biggest mistake because they lost complete control of our samples, and a lot of it, as you can see in the report, was destroyed. So it just became like there was a lack of trust when two reports were created. One was the initial report that Maddie's DNA had a very strong match of 15 out of 19 alleles. And then the later report was like, no, this was a mistake, and it could have been anybody's DNA. The true fact, and Dr. Perlin in the Maddie podcast explains, is that Maddie cannot be excluded from the trunk or from even the dog alerts behind the sofa because her components exist in this equation, okay? So we just need to take away the other components and basically divide them, identify each component, because the components were from at least three people. So he believes, Dr. Perlin believes that his new method, which have been helping, they're like miracle. It's a miracle method that has been helping so many crimes being solved here in the U.S. and internationally, that he can solve the problem. So he offered, it was revealed through the Maddie podcast by Mark Tonokonoko, that an offer had been made to Scotland Yard to take a new look at the data with a new computerized method that's been proved successful. So what everybody's talking about was that it has so far been refused by Scotland Yard. So that's kind of where we are, and people find this very suspicious.
So this is really, because when we talk about Scotland Yard, we're talking about Operation Grange, correct?
Correct.
So Operation Grange is specifically the unit that is assigned to investigate the Madeleine McCann case.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, they are a review. They set out to be a review of the case. The leading investigation team is still Portugal, okay? A lot of people do not realize this. They are two separate investigations. The real investigation is going on in Portugal as we speak, side by side with Operation Grange. These two from I have had phone calls with OB Grange and Judiciaria, and the attitude is very friendly between the two. It wasn't always like that. In the beginning, it wasn't always like that, and the Portuguese really felt that the old investigation was interfering with Portugal's investigation. And that is across the board, it's just the truth. You could see it at the time that there were fighting forces, and, many journalists wrote about it. The new investigation is a very quiet investigation. They are not running any commentary on their techniques of what it is that they're doing. They have been very, very quiet about. Also, a lot of these suspects, they have never come from Portugal or OP Grange. These constant media leaks always seem to come from the McCann family and their friends. One specific woman is a journalist, and she actually works out at the gym. She's a close friend of Kate McCann and Tracy Candola. And she often writes about all of these suspects. And they write about the suspect one week, and then the next week we find out this person's not a suspect. And it just keeps going and going and going. If you look at articles about the Maddie case, there's just suspects everywhere. But they are never quoted by Scotland Yard. It's always a friend of the family is commenting on this possible suspect. And the little girl is found in Australia and in a suitcase, and then that could be related to Maddie. But none of these ever come from Scotland Yard. Scotland Yard just says, yes, we know about it. We heard about that this child is missing. But it's always the parent's friend, mainly Tracy Candola, that is pushing these fake sightings. And it just makes you think, why would a legitimate friend of the family be pushing things that don't help the investigation at all? They actually confuse the investigation.
Yeah, that's a great point. I actually want to talk about some of those suspects and some of what seems like counter PR in a second. But I just want to first examine this offer from Dr. Mark Perlin and talk about how much money has Operation Grange asked for from or actually used, and aren't they asking for more money from the UK public?
Yes, correct. When I spoke to a detective at Scotland Yard, and they were very open about answering general questions. I asked, about the funding, and I said, they keep saying that the Operation Grange is going to stop. And he said, no, Operation Grange does not stop. Something to the fact that they do have their own budget, and they're always working ahead of the budget. So they don't stop just because they're waiting for the money. So I didn't see any indication from him, and he said, we're not stopping. And he said, and you shouldn't listen to the media because none of this information is coming from us. And, yes, there is a special budget that has to be accepted, but I'm sure, the Home Office and Scotland Yard, they know a little bit more than the public does as far as, budgeting. But it does have to be, in the end, accepted. But that doesn't mean that they would just stop the investigation, that there will probably be other funding available to it. So just think about it. The Home Office must think that there's something very important that can be done that, continues, that OP Grange continues their investigation. I always say it would have been very easy. And I know everybody's like, Isabelle, you're too positive about Operation Grange and Judiciaria. Because I see little items, I see things, and I have spoken to enough detectives and experts and retired FBI, and let's get into the retired FBI thing, because there's always retired FBI, and you're wondering, you're 40 years old, why are you retiring? But anyways, that's another day. But I just feel like that there's something, they keep going because they can get somewhere. They are peeling, like they said, we're peeling the onion. And a lot of the times when FBI and Scotland Yard, even when they talk about the peeling of the onion, is that you peel all the layers, and they fall off. And in the end, what's left, there's no more excuses for the perpetrator. You will, I really believe that at the end of that, peeling that onion, you will have the McCanns still there with all the questions answered. And, so I stay hopeful for that. I do think it's very odd, the DNA not being accepted.
This offer not being accepted. I mean, Isabelle, I put a lot of value in your opinion, but I'm naturally a more pessimistic person, and I've thought that perhaps Operation Grange was a cover-up, but with this revelation that they've refused free testing of this DNA, that would really give some certainty to this case, don't you? I mean, am I overstating its value, or would it just be another important piece in the puzzle, or how important is this DNA, really?
Okay, well, you're not overstating the value, and in fact, immediately after Dr. Perlin and Mark's brilliant podcast, articles started to show up from Tracy Candola, the McCanns friend, and others in tabloid media that DNA had been tested with the method DNA 17, and it failed to bring any answers. Well, immediately I was like, oh my God, Mark, what is this? And Mark very diligently explained that DNA 17, and of course with the help of Dr. Perlin, DNA 17 is a very old method that was available even back in 2007 when Maddie went missing. So to say that it's been tested with DNA 17, well, that's exactly probably what the FFS used at that time was the DNA 17. So to say that it's a breakthrough method would be erroneous. So again, we're deflecting from the truth. And again, the story did not come from Scotland Yard or Justiciaria. This story came from the McCanns people. From the gal that worked out at the gym with Kate McCann. So why if I was Kate or Jerry McCann, I would be calling, and in Portugal, the McCanns do have input. They are the parents of a missing child, and they could go to Portugal and say, why, this offer is free. Why aren't we doing this? But they're not. Instead, the gym buddy is pushing this story that the DNA has already been tested with DNA 17. Of course, one of the things I set out to do for Mark, which was really bothering me, was like, well, I want to speak to somebody at the Portuguese forensic legal lab, okay? And so I made several phone calls, and I thought the gal was ignoring me, but she actually sent me an email. Eventually, she had been on vacation, and Europeans have these long vacations, okay? So one of the specialists at the Instituto de Medicina Legal, which is a legal medicine institute, she's Dr. Maria João Porto, she finally answered me, and she told me, because that was my thing, is Portugal using these methods, this latest method? And it seems that in the United States, and even worldwide, TrueLL, Dr. Perlin's method, seems to be the number one. And then a very close second, I think, is the STR mix, okay? So I read some articles of Dr. Maria João Porto about her writing about STR mix and TrueLL. And so I knew, well, they're obviously aware of these methods. But when I asked her, she answered me back, and her answer was that Portugal, as of now, is not using either TrueLL or STR mix. They are all using an open source software. Now, I would need and Mark is now aware of this information because I sent it to him. So the next step is for Dr. Perlin, I think, to explain to us what do they mean by open source software. Now, reading about it, it seems like it's kind of like a generic drug. You know, it's not the real thing. It's putting different methods together. And so basically sourcing out. That's sort of my understanding of what this open source method is. But I also learned that STR Mix is coming to Portugal in July, not related to the Maddie case, you know, because, again, we have no idea what judiciaria. And when I speak to people, it's always general questions. You know, it was perfectly okay for Dr. Porto to say to me, no, in Portugal we're not using this method. This has nothing to do with the Maddie case. I always try to go around by not asking specific questions, by asking general questions that tell us a lot. So we know that in Portugal, according to one of their top legal analysts, or that they're not using either one of these methods, that one of them offered for free to Scotland Yard and Judiciaria.
So I'm just blown away by the fact that they put that story out in the press that this old technique is really some state-of-the-art new technique akin to real allele, you know? I mean, it just blew me away, Isabelle. You know, and it's so similar to other true crime cases, the way that they're spun that way, that if you don't know anything, you would just take it on surface value and say, oh, okay, well, they have done this already, then this is not important. And there has been real kind of a counter PR to this Maddie podcast. And you talked about there's been some new suspects that have been given to the press to write about. Like a German pedophile, I think. Is that right?
Yes, the German pedophile is nothing new. This is just respun old information about the German pedophile. Now, I know that Gonçalo Amaral did mention him as a patsy, but the Gonçalo Amaral, like many, you know, he surely has, I'm sure, a lot of people on the inside at Judiciaria who admire him, and, you know, and things are thrown about, and, you know, but the truth is that this investigation is so secretive that makes you wonder who is putting out these ideas, you know, that this could be a possibility, you know, because, again, none of this came, Judiciaria, because of course they hear about it, and then they're asked about it, and Judiciaria came out and said, no, we're not confirming any of it. So they couldn't confirm the German pedophile. Portugal did just confirm, which I love. They did confirm that they have added new people to the team in Porto, okay, which is where the analyst at the Instituto de Medicina Legal, that is, you know, those are the labs working for Judiciaria. You know, they run their tests and everything. So I was very excited that Portugal confirmed that they have just added new people, a new team. Because this tells me they're getting somewhere. Because there's no reason to add new people. I always knew this. In the end, someone told me, and I can't say you, but somebody told me, keep your eyes peeled for anything that has to do with the embassy, the Portuguese, British embassy, new people coming in, new people being added, because in the end, that's actually what we're going to see, because it's not Operation Grange who's going to solve the case, because they are a review. It could change eventually from a review to an actual case, but they would be working side by side with the Portuguese. And I even asked a lawyer once in the UK, a criminal lawyer, and she had to say to me, well, you're right. I asked her, I said very clearly, if two countries run two parallel investigations, separate investigations, on the same case. And they both come to the same conclusion. I did not mention Madeline because like this, you don't get the right answers. I brought it up as an hypothetical.
Mm-hmm.
Will then the criminal have to basically go up against two investigations who worked separately but came to the same conclusion? She goes, yeah, you're right, because now it's not just one investigation, it's two investigations that work separately. So, yes, the defense team would now have to discredit two different investigations that came to the same conclusion. So, yes, it does make it more difficult for a defense team. And that kind of thing always encourages me. So I don't know what's going on with the DNA. I would like Dr. Perlin to explain to us what this open source method is that they are that the Portuguese are now using, which seems to be sort of a new thing, and maybe it's not because I don't know. I just read a little bit about it, but Dr. Perlin could probably explain it better. But they're being very, very tight-lipped, so we don't know. Because my question was, in the Maddie podcast, Mark did say, we reached out to STR Mix to see if maybe STR Mix was being used, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And that was what I set out to be. Okay, so they're not using TrueLL because Dr. Perlin would know, but are they using the number 2, STR Mix, which is very good also, okay? The question for Portugal that we have is that, no, they are not using STR Mix. We still don't know what the UK is using, but, you know, this idea that the UK has these best labs, the FFS was not the best. The FFS, there are numerous failures, and it eventually closed. So we're not talking about, you know, just the ultimate. There are errors. There were errors at the FFS with grave. I mean, there's numerous articles about failures, and it's now closed. I don't think you really close something that's working, you know, at 100% rate. So, you know, they always say, you know, the proof is in the pudding, and the FFS that tested the Maddie samples is now closed.
Interesting. So, besides for the DNA, was there anything in the Maddie podcast that surprised or shocked you?
Yes. Okay. One of the things was, and it always goes back to money. Mark Sonokonoko had an expert, a forensic, not a forensic, but a financial analyst, accounting, and she went over the Madeleine-McCann fund, the money. And she found a huge lack of transparency. And she went item by item about why she felt that the Madeleine-McCann fund was not being transparent. And that there was, for something that's supposed to be a charity, which we know it's not, why it was open just for Maddie, why it was originally rejected as a charity, and it was never a charity. It's a limited liability company. So just her explaining the lack of transparency, I think it's really worth it. There's an episode really dedicated to the fund. So I think that, to me, was a really great fun. Another item that I thought was amazing was the Portuguese investigative private detective that worked, I believe, with CBS News, and for one of the crime shows. And he went on location in Portugal undercover. Okay. Now, this gentleman, I mean, he didn't particularly impress me, but I don't think he's a fibber or a liar. I think he was very honest when he explained that he went undercover. And one thing that he found was that a lot of people working there felt that the McCanns were very neglectful, that they were just having a good old time, and they were not checking on the kids as they said they were checking on the kids. That there's a very big difference in their description of what happened and what really happened. Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
I remember seeing a video of a bartender saying, "Oh, I remember the tapas crew, and they weren't doing checks that night. They weren't doing any checks." Do you remember that video?
Yeah, I do. And a lot of the people from the tapas bar and employees, they felt that the McCanns and their family were just sort of phony, fake people. Even when Maddie was missing, they were at the pool asking for free food. They were kind of, the workers there really felt that the McCanns and their people were freeloaders, really, and just really that they also, some of them felt that maybe some of the tapas people were more concerned about Madeleine missing than her own parents. So there's a lot of that. But all of these things are all hearsay, and they do not solve the case. But it does give us a look of how people felt about the McCanns, people that were there, And because of my Twitter account, over the years, many people that were there have actually contacted me and said, we automatically knew that there was something wrong, and they were trying to scare children, that now that there was some crazy person on the loose, and we just never believed it, because being there, you just don't know how this could have happened. People really had a feeling of security, and even though McCanns were pushing a certain story, people weren't really feeling that. They were still feeling that Loose was a pretty safe place, and that this was a fake abduction. So anyway, so those two things really stood out to me. That story of the McCanns checks were really not really what was happening at the time.
And while you were speaking about the impression that the staff had of the McCanns, I was thinking about a conversation I had with a friend of mine about this case, and she originally believed the McCanns abduction narrative, and she has since changed her mind, and we actually used to argue about it. And I was saying, you made such great arguments when you were so passionate, even though I thought you were wrong. And she said, it's just so hard to believe this case that these parents would do, would cover something like this up. And I said, yeah, it's only hard to believe if it's the parents that's presented to the public, the sort of PR McCanns. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, of course.
I mean, that's these right amazing doctors, these caring parents,
Yes, well, right from the beginning, it circulated that Jerry McCann was a surgeon. I mean, we could not even get his job description correctly.
So what do you think the ultimate impact of the Maddie podcast has been?
Well, I've really noticed that after Mark so bravely investigated in detail the Madeleine McCann case, other journalists have now come out of the woodwork, and experts and others who before were not willing to speak so openly. And now, like I noticed, there's a new podcast with Jim Clemente and Laura Richards and another gal. And I had communicated with Laura before, very nice lady, and I could tell that she had doubts about the McCann story, but she was, of course, very cautious, and I don't blame her. Everybody has to be cautious, because before speaking, Sonia Fulton has told us, that it was suicide. even Colin Sutton mentioned to me once, too, that it was just like something that people were not going to talk about because it just was not acceptable to talk about. And it makes you think, who are these McCanns that people were not allowed to, give their expert opinion? Even that became a taboo, and some sort of thing to be afraid of. So, now with Jim Clemente coming on board with Laura, it's actually very interesting, because Jim Clemente is this retired FBI person, and Laura Richards, actually, some of the information I found so compelling, and she's basically teaching him as they go along, because he is speaking in generalities of things that he believes that's how they should be. But it's obvious that he does not understand the Madeleine-McCann case at all. There's a lot of mistakes in what he says. And so he's kind of learning as he goes along. Sorry, Jim, but that's just my review of somebody who has been here since almost the very beginning and learning about this case. And Laura, who's actually explaining to him, no, that's really not what happened, or, we are looking at this. One of the things that I found is a very strong point made by Laura was that when she was at Scotland Yard at the time when Maddie went missing, was that she was surprised that CEOP, the organization that Jim Gamble used to be the head of, he was later, he quit, which you always wonder when people quit these powerful positions, you're like, did he really quit? I mean, I don't believe that. I don't think people give up big money just because. So, I mean,
right.
I feel he was put out, but I mean,
he might not have just quit to spend more time with his family. That might not have been that's usually what they say, Isabel, when
exactly.
they step down.
And then May, the immediate, overseer boss at the time, she basically called CEOP sort of a quango and under Jim Gamble, and so I don't think that comes across as a compliment. So, but we don't know. These are just opinions. But I thought that was really interesting that she felt that way. That she thought it was odd that CEOP had gotten right from the beginning involved in this missing child's case. So I would love to hear her talk more about that area. I thought that was very interesting too.
So do you think this podcast came to counter the Maddie podcast in any way, or do you think they just are kind of hopping aboard on the success of it,
Well, I think maybe it allowed some freedom. It could be a little bit of both, how good Jim Clemente is or is not, really doesn't matter. He did work for the FBI, and Laura was with Scotland Yard, so we're talking about experts. And so these are people that we would like to hear speaking out, that never really wanted to speak out before. And when they spoke, because I know that Laura spoke before about the dogs, how she believes that the dog evidence. Mm-hmm. And somebody said, oh, you're defending the McCanns. I actually came to her defense at the time, and I said, well, there's a little bit more to this, because I don't think she's defending the McCanns. I think she's saying that this dog evidence is very, very strong, especially when there were so many alerts. So, so I guess I have a little bit of a soft spot for Laura, and I think, so I find a lot of legitimacy in some of the things that she's saying. And, I have other people that have been, my friend Ann, she helped to translate the Maddie McCann files, mm-hmm. and still does quite a few things for the case. And even Ann said, Laura's not that bad. There's still a few things that were like, oh God, I would love to tell her this. or that. And I sent her a few messages, but she's doing her thing, and she obviously has done a lot more research than Jim Clemente. He seems blind to a lot of the real issues.
Mm. Of course, where I'm sitting, because I know Jim Clemente's history. He was paid by the Paterno family to absolve him, to look into whether Paterno knew about Sandusky, and then Jim Clemente wrote this big report saying Paterno absolutely didn't know. Jerry Sandusky had the nice guy offender profile. Nobody knew. And then it came out in court records, came out that, they knew since 1974, 1974 or 1976. I'm not sure which one. I'd have to double check that. But, really early on in the 70s. And then Jim Clemente also used to just put out, incorrect information about the Amanda Knox case. He was also not great on the West Memphis 3 case. So, of course, as the cynic in me, I wonder if, Laura is going to be the counter to Jim Clemente, who's going to just push an abduction theory so that to try to kind of win back some minds that might have been, convinced by the Maddie podcast. Of course, that's just me asking the question, not a statement of fact.
Yeah, exactly, and it's completely legitimate. And yes, and you're right about the Paterno Sandusky. I mean, that was in the end. It just everybody knew about it. These boys were victims, and everybody knew they were victims, and it's really sickening. But we see it across. We see it across the world with big cases like this, where in the end everybody knew. The UK had, the few entertainers, and Portugal had also the entertainers and the orphanage at Casapia. Like in France, it's a systematic abuse of children where everybody says they didn't know that it was going on, but in the end, people knew, and people defended, and people continued to defend this. And as long as we have people willing to defend this behavior, it will keep going. The Madeleine-McCann case is surrounded by pedophilia. I'm not, and you can't go accusing anybody of this, but my God, every time you turn around, you have the Gaspar statements, the McCann's closest friends talking about pedophilia. You have Jerry McCann within minutes of Madeleine being missing. Somebody overhears them on the phone talking about pedophilia. And then they have the pedophile, Clement Freud, who was a pedophile, and then he's having Kate and Jerry McCann over for dinner. And then we have C-Off getting involved right from the beginning, as Laura now very clearly said she was surprised that they were involved. So it just keeps going, and it's just all over society.
What do you say to people? I guess a lot of people in the comments have asked similar questions, which is who's protecting the McCanns, or is this a elite pedophile network protecting the McCanns? What do you say to that? I mean, what is your answer to that?
I feel like there's something very dark in this case. But it's not clear, but all of this is done on purpose. The pedophilia, people don't just come out and and say, yes, there's abuse, there is no abuse. So it's hard to say, and I hate to go there because there is not complete proof. All we have is these crazy things. And now in the UK, you probably don't know this, but there's a whole case with Celtic football where Jerry McCann was one of the doctors for Celtic football. So Maddie's involved in that too. So here comes pedophilia again of these children being abused, and Jerry McCann is right in the middle of it.
It's called, what is the football club?
Celtic football even raised money for Madeleine.
Interesting.
So, it keeps coming up. It just keeps being added on and compiled, and you're like, why so much? But it's hard to say, So I always have a hard time going there. I do feel that this case is very dark, and there's definitely lots of very odd people involved with this case.
Yeah, I have the same answer, which is we just don't know yet. It looks like it. I mean, we just don't know. And I think that's what keeps me interested in the case, and other people too. You tweeted a picture that I had never seen of Kate McCann right after Madeleine had gone missing, covered in bruises. Where is that picture from? Did the Portuguese police take pictures or make a note of it? And what did she say the bruises were from?
This is a huge failure by the Portuguese at the time. I think this should have been very well noted. I mean, they were around the parents. They should have been observing these parents from day one, but they gave them a lot of room to wiggle. Even Gonçalo Moral says that it was a big mistake that they didn't follow the McCanns. They never followed them. The McCanns put, it was like 11,000 miles on the car during, a 3-month holiday in a tiny little country. The car was allowed to leave Portugal. There really were no restrictions on the McCanns. So it just makes you wonder, a lot of these things, you're like, how did the bruises go unnoticed? Okay. So basically, in Fiona, one of the Tapas women, she talked about that Kate McCann the next day. Okay, now let's remember this was at 10 o'clock at night. So it always feels like it's really the 3rd and the 4th are really the same day because there's, it happened at night, so it wasn't a full day. So she said that the next morning that Kate had a fit of rage, which is an odd thing because they say rage comes later. Usually it's more shock, fear, action, and then rage comes much later. But within, an hour of Maddie going missing, Kate was hurting herself. Okay, basically banging on walls and headboards and whatever she could find and kicking and screaming. Okay. The next morning, Fiona talks about it, the next day, Kate was covered in bruises. And we have that. Then what we also have is that on the 5th, we see pictures of Kate. And these bruises, if you can see bruises in pictures that are from far away with a lens, think about how these bruises actually looked in person, okay? And so I posted these bruises. They're legitimate pictures. You can see them in AP. You can see them in Solarplex. A lot of the photographers that uploaded these pictures, they're very visible. And there's also like a scar, like a red thing above her head. And the McCann people, some of these people on Twitter would say, no, that's a birthmark. But in Madeleine McCann, in Maddie's book by Kate McCann, there's pictures of Kate. She has no such birthmark above her eye. Now, we don't know if she had that before because there aren't very, pictures like days before. But she definitely had a big red mark above her eye.
It's a very unusual kind of mark, yeah. It almost does look like a birthmark, but it's obviously not. But it's an odd, it's an odd injury, no?
Yeah, exactly. And it turned into a scar because it faded. In the pictures, like 2 or 3 months later, as you look at all the pictures, you see it fading. So it's healing. So obviously a birthmark doesn't heal, okay? And so you see it quite well until now it's completely gone. You see it in Kate McCann's pictures now, and she no longer has it. So obviously it's not a birthmark. It wasn't there before because you see it in her wedding pictures and you see it in pictures with her girlfriend and pictures of Kate and Jerry skiing. That mark is not there. So it's not there now, and it wasn't there before. And now what's there is like a slight scar, like a very faded So it was big enough, the scar, because the scar is there. You see it very lightly.
So it's interesting that their answer is that it's from a fit of rage, an admission that she
Yes.
has fits of rage, even at least
Okay,
one.
but the thing is, a fit of rage, how long does it take for bruises? I mean, you have to remember, so this fit of rage happened at 11 o'clock at night, but the next day, this fit of rage, the bruises are everywhere. I mean, bruises don't usually show up. I mean, some people they do, but that's pretty rare. Usually it takes, a couple of days before people would see bruising. I mean, otherwise you'd see more like of a redness. But here is Fiona saying she is covered, and the language is very clear. She's covered in bruises. And when we think of a bruise, we think, black and blue, right? I mean, isn't that what you think?
Yes.
So again, we're talking about next day, so with less than 12 hours, she's covered in bruises. And she did this to herself. Kate McCann covered herself in bruises, although these bruises look like they go all the way around her wrist. Okay? So I don't understand how, and of course, you can research it in medical journals and things, and when somebody grabs you by the wrist, you get the kind of bruises that Kate McCann had, which are restraining bruises. There are so many pictures online where you can see what a restraining bruise. I don't understand how banging a wall gives you bruises all around your wrist. You would think that, banging a wall, you would get the bruise on the side of your hand, but her bruises definitely look like, I'm not a medical doctor, so I don't know. But it's just odd that the police themselves, there's nowhere in the files where these bruises are mentioned except for Fiona's statement.
Yeah, that's a shame. That's really a shame. Because it's just, I was just so shocked. I'd never seen that before, and it's a very interesting. I think it's quite telling.
There's signs around every corner with this case.
Yeah, isn't it? Isabelle, thank you so much for talking to us about this case. I always think, we've talked about almost everything we could possibly talk about the McCann case, but there's always more, and you know so much, so thank you so much.
Yes, no, thank you. Thank you, Roberta.